Welcome to the Disability Inclusion and Access Moving Forward How to Accessibility webinar series. My name is Mary Brocker, and I spend time heading the operations area with the company where I work, Bender Consulting Services, and we're thrilled to share with you this accessibility webinar series. We are now in the second part of a 5-part series. This series, by the way, is brought to you by the FISA Foundation and the Heinz Endowment. So thank you so much for joining. As we are beginning, I'd love to be able to introduce some of the participants for today. Our host, Christy Troutman, is the Executive Director of the FISA Foundation. She'll be joining us in a moment. Our moderator is Sherry Lapaya, who's the Manager of Talent Programs for Bender. If you should have any questions, feel free to interact with us via the chat feature on the webinar platform. Today, you will definitely be delighted that Gerald Homey, the product manager of Bender's Careers to Be Workforce Development Program, will be our speaker. He will be sharing insight as it relates to website accessibility, and about halfway through we'll be joined by a giant in the digital accessibility community, RJ Heller, who's the Director of Sales for AudioEye. So you're definitely in for a treat today. You know, as I mentioned, our topic today is website accessibility, the ramps and rails of the digital world. It's of course important for those of us with disabilities to be able to interact in the workplace, to be able to interact with programs, to be able to apply for jobs, to be able to participate in community. And of course, we are attached to technology as humans in the free world today. So this topic is very important to all of us. As we are this year, 2020, in the community, we're thrilled to be celebrating the 30th anniversary of the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And this represents one iteration of that celebration. And as I mentioned, I happen to head operations for Bender Consulting. We at Bender are celebrating Bender 25. So today we'll be kicking off very quickly. I'll be sharing with you a bit about who I am and what we do. And then we'll talk about, Gerald principally will be driving the conversation to talk about digital accessibility, website accessibility basics, and accessibility fails, and troubleshooting technique tips. So what do we do when we do have an accessibility fail? So a little bit about Bender. I happen to, as I mentioned, had operations for Bender. Our company was founded by Joyce Bender, a giant in the disability community. In addition to founding and really exploding freedom through competitive employment for people with disabilities over the last 25 years. And of course, delivering software solutions through our iDisability e-learning platform and partnering with companies like AudioEye to address digital accessibility matters and helping big businesses build disability employment and inclusion strategic plans. Joyce also is the founder of Bender Leadership Academy, a not-for-profit organization that sets out to reset the career trajectory for students living with disabilities, to really work to increase the labor force participation rate. You know, at Bender, we have an opportunity not just to interact with our treasured customers, to have an impact on the disability community gaining freedom through competitive employment for people with disabilities, but we have an opportunity to spend time with great partners. Our CEO happens to be the vice chair of the American Association of People with Disabilities, and she is so proud, as well as a woman living with epilepsy, to be the chair of the Epilepsy Association of Western and Central Pennsylvania, one of the most impactful organizations globally, supporting people living with epilepsy and their families to manage consequences in care and to really drive full inclusion in community and in work. Joyce is the Joyce has a radio show, Disability Matters, with Joyce Bender. It airs on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Christy Troutman, who will be joining us in a moment, was yesterday's guest. And Joyce also has been acknowledged internationally internationally and has spent some time with U.S. State Department visits talking about disability employment in places like Panama, South Korea, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Japan, impacting employers, public sector entities, academic institutions, and people with disabilities. Our company at Bender, we've spent time providing solutions in the private sector and in the public sector with large companies such as Highmark, who stood behind Bender when we started 25 years ago, and others including PNC Bank, a giant, Comcast, DXC, and many public sector entities, including the National Security Agency. So at this point in time, I would absolutely love to turn it over to Christy Troutman, the Executive Director of the FISA Foundation. Thank you, Christy.
Thanks so much, Mary, for that introduction. As Mary alluded, FISA Foundation is pleased to be one of the sponsors for today. FISA is a charitable grant-making foundation focused on improving the lives of women, girls, and people with disabilities in Southwest Pennsylvania. FISA and the Heinz Endowments launched a joint initiative last November called Disability Inclusion and Action Moving Forward to help our grantees and partners better address accessibility in their work. This webinar series is an important component of that initiative. If you missed the first webinar, Disability 101, two weeks ago, you can now watch a fully captioned accessible recording on your own time. You can visit www.disabilityinclusionpgh.org to see that recording and for additional resources. In many ways, the internet has revolutionized access for people with disabilities, allowing folks to learn, shop, study, and watch cat videos just like everybody else, which has been one of the goals of the disability civil rights movement. But the internet has also introduced new accessibility barriers that are not as well recognized as physical barriers, hence this webinar. We're delighted to partner with a great team at Bender Consulting to provide this webinar today, which will help you learn to recognize common barriers on websites and to figure out how to address them. And just like curb cuts have improved the lives of skateboarders, parents pushing strollers, delivery people hauling boxes on dollies, and travelers with wheeled suitcases, we believe that removing accessibility barriers on your website will improve the experience of many users with and without disabilities. With that, I'm happy to turn the program back over to you, Mary.
Thanks so much, Christy, and I really appreciate your leadership in this space. It's wonderful that we have philanthropy. You are a giant in the Western Pennsylvania area and a giant globally as well, Christy, advancing education about this important topic of website accessibility. So without further delay, I would love to introduce Gerald Homey, who is going to proceed through the learning content of today's event. Gerald, again, the product manager for our Careers to Be Workforce Development Program and key associate within Bender's HITEST practice, our digital accessibility practice. Gerald, off to you.
Thanks so much, Mary. Really excited to bring this presentation to you today to discuss the importance of digital accessibility. And thank you so much, Christy, for framing that conversation so wonderfully. We're going to talk about what digital accessibility is and why it's important first before we get into some of the basics that you can learn about this topic. So digital accessibility is ensuring that all users of technology can access all of your digital content equally. So just like in the physical space, making sure that all folks with disabilities can get into your coffee shop, this is making sure that when you order food from that coffee shop online, all users can do that as an example. So why is digital accessibility important? So why this is important is that 15% of the global population are people with disabilities. So when you are including digital accessibility in your website, you are including 1 billion people worldwide. You are increasing your footprint to access 1 billion additional individuals with your organization. So when you are developing your website, you can widen the talent pool. You can connect with way more folks with disabilities that want to interact with your organization, that want to volunteer, that want to, participate in events and celebrate the great things your organizations are contributing to your communities. You want to do this because it'll increase the amount of contributions and program participation with your organization if your websites are accessible. And that's how people primarily donate to your organization. That's going to allow those folks to be able to contribute the dollars towards that organization. And then you're going to, when the disability community is included within your organization, make sure you get those diverse perspectives that folks with disabilities bring. And in addition to that, you're going to be more compliant, because compliance, of course, is important. We all want to make sure as we are conducting our activities that we are being compliant with the letter of the law. And this is becoming increasingly, important as you see, the number of federal digital accessibility lawsuits increased from in 2017, 814 lawsuits to in 2018, 2,250 lawsuits. So this is something that is becoming increasingly more important when you're looking at your digital footprint. So I want to talk a little bit about accessibility. What is a technology user with digital accessibility, and what's the experience for those individuals? So, we like to talk about user experience all the time. This is something really important when you're talking about the design of your website. What is the user experience? What are they going to do when they get there? And if you're not considering digital accessibility into this concept, you're not considering everyone's user experience. So a lot of individuals will utilize technology to interface with their technology. So they're going to be using different tools that allows them to navigate a website, and understanding how those folks go about that and making sure that path that they traverse is positive is going to be the key to understanding digital accessibility. And this impacts a lot of different folks with disabilities, and in fact folks who have vision disabilities, learning disabilities, who are hard of hearing, who are colorblind, who have mobility related disabilities. These are all different groups that are affected by digital accessibility. So this is really important. So that being said, we're going to go to the next slide. We're going to talk about how does a person with a disability interact with your website in detail. So for individuals who have vision impairment, folks who are blind and will often use screen readers. Screen readers are a piece of technology that'll read everything on the screen to you as you are navigating through the website. So it'll read all of the text. It'll go through that. The individual user will do this by navigating through the website with their keyboard. Elements that are visual, the screen reader will use information provided on the site to describe what that information is. Just like a sighted user can skip content easily by scrolling and skipping past the things they don't want to read, there's built-in tools for skipping through the site as well as a screen reader user. Then there's individuals who have mobility disabilities, and they will navigate the computer differently as well. Some of them will use alternative navigation devices. These are pieces of hardware that they use that will help them navigate through your website. Some of them may use voice recognition software, such as Dragon Naturally Speaking, to navigate through your website. And there's, important pieces for that. So this is somebody who is going to either navigate entirely through a keyboard or a similar device. Then there's individuals who have auditory disabilities, and these are things where captioning services are very beneficial. Things that are conveyed only through audio are not great things to use because they won't be able to access that content. And then finally, there's folks in the intellectual category. These also include folks that have learning disabilities. They may benefit from being able to turn on specialized fonts that make it beneficial for somebody like me who has dyslexia to be more able to easily read the content on your screen, or way navigate the computer with voice recognition software as well to fill in form fields and things like that. It's also making sure that content is worded in the best possible ways. It's consistent, it's predictable. There's strong content for navigation as well. So as it comes to digital accessibility, WCAG is the gold standard for digital accessibility. WCAG is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And this is really great because this is really the tool that is used as the technical standard for folks with disabilities to be able to navigate your website. We're not going to go all into the nitty-gritty detail of what WCAG is, but we're going to cover the 4 main elements of WCAG and how this drives digital accessibility. So what we're going to be doing today is showing you some content that if you use this to help develop your site to be accessible, you're going to be getting towards those golden standards of WCAG 2.1. So POUR is the acronym that we use when we're talking about the 4 categories of WCAG, which includes perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So perceivable means that all of the information that you have on your website can be consumed by all different users. Operable covers that the design of the website can be used and navigated by anyone without inclusion of functions that some people cannot perform. So if there's something that somebody can interact with on your website, you want to make sure that everyone can interact with it. Understandable is ensuring that the content is easy to comprehend and easy to navigate. Robust is ensuring it's designed in a way as technologies advance that the content will remain accessible. So using these robust methods are going to ensure that you are future-proof for digital accessibility on your digital presence.
Gerald, thanks so much for sharing with all of us participating in the event perspective about digital accessibility. We're excited to hear about common website accessibility fails and some troubleshooting tips very soon. But in the meantime, I would absolutely love to welcome to our event today RJ Heller. RJ is a giant in the digital accessibility community. RJ is the Director of Sales for AudioEye. He's the head of of enterprise market and direct sales. And AudioEye is a company out of Tucson, Arizona that just has an amazing, elegant solution, technology solution to address the digital accessibility barriers that exist sometimes for those of us living with disabilities. So RJ, I'd love to pass it on to you, and please share with those who are participating, why digital accessibility is important for their organization.
Great. Thank you very much, Mary. And also thank you to the FISA Foundation for having me. This is an extremely important topic, and I'm honored to be invited to speak on it. The biggest thing I'd like to get across today is access equals freedom. And if we roll back and look at the purpose of the ADA initially, it's to provide access to people with disabilities to the same thing that the rest of us are blessed to have. So this originally came over as ramps and rails for people in physical spaces, so everyone can have same access to whatever it may be, whether it's being able to run errands or being able to go to the grocery store or picking up birthday presents. And in the last couple decades, dramatically, especially in the last 5 years, these places of public accommodation have moved from brick and mortar stores to online. And to that point, AudioEye's mission is to eradicate all barriers to digital accessibility and to dramatically improve the lives of people with disabilities. And it's our goal that by 2025, we can make the entirety of the internet completely accessible. So if you think about all the endless opportunities that the internet has created for people with disabilities who originally and previously had difficulties exiting out of their house and into the world, now having all this at their fingertips, it is unbelievably frustrating to be so close, yet so far to having complete access. And again, access equals freedom. Accessibility creates independence, and our goal is to have that for everybody. So to those on this call that are listening, the biggest point that I could get across is that this starts with all of you. So rather than starting projects and having accessibility be the afterthought that you look to tack on at the end, I challenge you to think about accessibility, to think about compliance, and to think about the project that you're building with accessibility in mind moving forward and all the people whose lives you're going to make dramatically better. And to that point, with AudioEye, if you can't run and do it all at once, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. We offer free accessibility analysis and free accessibility tools. Obviously, we have larger engagements that we're happy to help anyone with. But if all you can do at this time is get a scan of your site, you can go to our website, put it in the box that we have on our homepage, and we'll print out a scan for you, and we'll print it out. We'll send out a scan to you. And also for the things that we can fix, we provide a free accessibility toolkit on there so you can get it started and get the wheels moving and get these projects started. As a whole, it's the hardest thing that I hear when I talk to people about accessibility and I tell them what I do is their first response is, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I had no idea about that." And my response is, it's okay that you had no idea about it. That just means you're blessed and you didn't have these type of barriers in your life before. But what you have now is knowledge about what's going on in the area. So everyone that's attending, thank you for putting this in the forefront of what you're doing. And if there's anything that we can do to help, we're going to go out of our way to do so. And I really appreciate the FISA Foundation as well to be able to be empowering people with this knowledge so we can make the lives of everyone else much better.
RJ, thank you so much. Access equals freedom. Doesn't that just say it all? And RJ, I've got to tell you, we just treasure our partnership with you at AudioEye. To have a company that's publicly traded on the NASDAQ, a technology company, set the bar of ensuring by 2025 the internet is accessible for people with disabilities. You know what? We are all in, and we in the disability community are just grateful that a technology giant like AudioEye, and frankly, a decent human and amazing leader, RJ, like you, are walking beside us, and we are so grateful. So without further delay, Gerald, I'd love to pass it back on to you.
Thanks so much, Mary. I appreciate it. And we're going to really get into the meat of things here now, really go over some common accessibility fails and tips on how you can troubleshoot these errors. So this way you can go and see if there are any barriers for digital accessibility on your own websites and figure out game plans to go and correct these different things. So we're going to talk through some of these now. So One of the most common fails that we see are issues that relate to navigation and how people navigate around a website. And this can include elements that automatically activate, and those are things like going to a website and a video all of a sudden starts playing on the website and audio is bursting, and the person with a screen reader is trying to hear the content on the page, but they are trying to figure out how to navigate to turn this off because it's really makes it difficult for them to consume the content on the site. So having those not automatically activate when you go to the website, or some websites have pop-up content that will interrupt the user who is trying to navigate that and will prevent them from being able to continue. So avoiding those types of things is really important. Another really common one are scrolling banners or carousels that automatically move along the page. You want to make sure there's some ability to pause those, so that way that a person who uses screen magnification when they go to inspect that content doesn't have it constantly moving away from them as they're trying to frantically chase it because they want to engage with that content. So next is the inability for the user to tab through the website in an organized way. And this comes down to folks that are using the keyboard to navigate the website. The keyboard users will use the tab key frequently to scroll through all of the available content on the page. And some pages are organized in a way so that as they use that tab key to navigate, it jumps them from the top of the page to the bottom of the page to the middle of the page. It takes you everywhere but where you would try to navigate logically. And this makes it very difficult for folks that use the keyboard to navigate because of a motor impairment, but also for individuals who are blind who can't see the logical way they're supposed to be reviewing the content, and then they just really won't understand what's going on with that site and choose to disconnect. Once again, for folks that have motor impairments and using a keyboard to navigate that can see on the screen, when they're using that keyboard to navigate, they want to be able to tell what they're navigating to. So you don't want there to be no clear visual indicator of navigation or destination. You want something to show focus, so something that highlights what content you're navigating to. You may be familiar with seeing this when you put your mouse over a link and you see that there's a glow around the link or a box that is visual to show that if you click, something's going to happen. You want that same kind of content for people navigating with the keyboard. Another issue could be incorrectly labeled or misused form fields. So these are fields that don't tell you what you're supposed to fill in when the person navigates to them, or the label associated with the field is different from what the content is supposed to be. You want to avoid duplicated navigational language. So this could be using the same word more than once on links that you have. So, for example, having 5 different links on your page that just the link says click here. But as a screen reader user, you'll oftentimes pull up a list of links to navigate through the website. But when you have 5 different links that are exactly the same, that go to different places, it becomes very difficult to navigate through all of those. And similarly, to make it less confusing, you don't want to have 10 different links that link to the same place on your website. So this is one of those ways where meeting accessibility also creates a more usable website. Unnamed or unclear links and anchors, specifically with anchors. Anchors are content where you will click on it, it'll take you to another section of the same web page you're already on. If these links do not say where they're going to take you as you're navigating through this, it's going to, take you where you don't expect to go, and it's going to be disorienting for somebody trying to navigate through your website. And in general, just avoiding clutter and disorganized content. So this affects, like I said, folks with vision disabilities, mobility disabilities, intellectual disabilities. The impact is that it makes it difficult for them to obtain the content that they need easily on your website. If they have that negative experience, they're going to go, I have to go get this from their website. They may not do so because of that past experience. So a solution could be to audit the site for non-visual navigation ease and make sure that headings, links, and anchors, all of these things are labeled correctly. And you can use that tool of tabbing through the content of your website yourself, just trying to navigate your website on your own using your keyboard and not your mouse to see what that experience is like for somebody doing so. Another common website accessibility fail involves the use of headings. Headings are essential for the organization of content on a website, and they're used to convey the flow and the content and how things should be grouped together. And it's integral for understanding what content goes together. Typically for us, for individuals who are sighted and, navigating a website, you can see visually the difference between a first level heading, a subheading, and paragraph text. But if those are not labeled effectively, a individual who's blind won't be able to tell what that content is in terms of its heading level. And also those headings are used to navigate the website effectively, to jump to the specific section that they've visited before, or they know there's important content that they want to get access to. It's really important to be able for them to just jump to that section, just like we would quickly scroll down a page to find that section. Many people will use headings just to make text bigger and provide emphasis, as opposed to their actual intention of being a heading for a section on the website, and that introduces unintentional confusion into that navigation as well. So you want to avoid using headings just to make it, more aesthetic, and you want to make sure that you're using the normal flow of these: heading 1, heading 2, heading 3 as appropriate, not skipping different heading levels because you want the text smaller or bigger. You can manage those sizes and differences in other ways. And then paragraphs, the content that you're reading should also be for paragraph users. And also it does impact them, folks with mobility concerns, because they will also use those jumping tools to scroll to the content they want to consume the most, or revisit and make sure that they explain to other people by getting the right content from your website. So obviously this would impact people from being able to navigate your website effectively, and just making sure that the outline structure of those headings on your page is a clear and beneficial to the content is the best way to go about solving that problem. Another common issue we see involves tables. People will use tables to present data that wouldn't typically be in a table. So they have a bulleted list, and instead of making it a bulleted list, they'll turn it into a table, and we'll put the content in the bulleted list into a table. And that's really difficult for somebody to navigate and understand the content in that fashion. Another thing that people will do is they'll have a very large table, and there will not be headers in the top row of the table. Those at the top of the row, you have all the different content that explains what the data below is. And for most of us as a sighted user, you can just look at the top of the table and see, okay, I see this is the percentage number for this specific statistic. But for a screen reader user who's navigating through this cell by cell with a keyboard, if that header row is not designated appropriately for them to be able to tell what the heading is for the current cell they're on, they have to navigate all the way clear back up to the top, and it makes it nearly impossible to navigate the content in a way that's effective and they're able to understand what's going on, where having that header row designated allows them, just like us, to easily check what is the header for the row I'm in, what's this data that I'm looking at, to make it easy to navigate. So what you want to do is you want to, make sure that people can consume content in a meaningful way from your tables. And wherever you have tables, you want to make sure that they truly should be a table, that it's data that needs to be presented in a tabular format, and not just something where you would like to use it for organization. Instead, switch to columns and things like that. In those instances. And if it is a true table, you want to make sure that the headings are for the rows of the table are labeled appropriately, so it's easy for people to understand the content presented in that table. So we're going to go through a few different scenarios here to help illustrate some of these as well. So the first scenario we're going to talk about is a donation form. So this is a form for someone to go and make a contribution on a website. So Talia is interested in supporting a colleague who participated in an upcoming walkathon fundraiser, and her colleague has sent a link to the team page with instructions on how to donate to his cause. Talia is a screen reader user and is unable to complete the donation form. So we've all gone and filled out forms on a website before, and as you can see, there's a lot of content in this form that needs filled out. First name, last name, contact information, credit card number. There's content here that we can tell is required to be filled out because of an asterisk associated with that content. So let's see, what is this going to be like for Talia? So the potential accessibility errors: lack of form field labels. So what we don't see is that some of these labels may have the wrong label. So it may just say name, but there's two different fields for the name. There's first name and last name. So how do you know which one to put in if the label that you read is name? Because as you're navigating to each form field, it's reading what the label is for that field, not the text in the paragraphs off to the side. It also may be that as they're tabbing through this table, that it goes in an incorrect order. It jumps around the form fields instead of going in the order we would fill them out from top to bottom. Sometimes these forms will have a timeout function that will prevent them from being able to complete the form quickly, and the additional time it takes to navigate with the additional accessibility concerns, or just when using the specialized hardware and software, causes them not to be able to fill out the form quickly enough to meet that guideline. There may be drop-down boxes that you can only select those options if you physically use the mouse while hovering over that box, and that eliminates anybody who uses a keyboard to navigate these forms from filling those out. There may be section headers that are rendered as images with no alt text, so no alternate text to explain what those images are to an individual who is blind. And then also, it may not indicate which of those fields that we saw the asterisk for are required to be filled out. So they may fill out this form, be get the form rejected because they did not fill out a required field, but they can't go back and check which fields are required to be able to successfully fill it out. So as you can see, there's a lot of different things that go into the creation of this to make sure that it's going to be actionable for folks with disabilities when visiting the website. So I talked a little bit about alt text. I want to go into this a little bit further because this is a good topic of discussion. So alt text is non-textual representation of, well, alt text is text that you apply to images and other content to explain visual content to individuals who cannot perceive that content. So some fails around alternative text include not providing it at all for essential non-text images. So these are images that you want everyone to, understand the content that's there, that's essential to the content you're conveying, but there's no representation for it in the alt text. Another common fail with this is text that calls it an image. So, when a blind person is navigating a website, they see that there's an image there. They can tell that there's an image. So when the alt text says image, what they hear is image. And it's this repetitive text that's unnecessary, but also doesn't actually describe the content that's there. Incredibly long alt text is also really difficult. You don't want it to be over 125 characters. You don't want text that has no alt text, or images that has no alt text whatsoever. Images that have text within the image and you aren't conveying what that text is in the alt text. Duplication of information is another one. So you may have a map of the United States and there's a caption under the map that says map of the United States. Well, in that case, you don't also need alt text to say that here's a map of the United States, because that information is already being conveyed. And then also, one of my favorites are the misuse of alt text for decorative images in tapestry. So this is where things get overboard and there's non-essential images. Things like the box at the top of this PowerPoint slide that is behind the text common website accessibility fails. You do not need to provide alt text for that saying a blue box to let them know that there's a blue box there. Now, if that was an image and that they couldn't navigate through that text, you would want to provide alt text that said common website accessibility fails, but you wouldn't need to describe it as a blue box. So this primarily affects folks who have a vision disability, and the impact is that they won't be able to perceive that content, or it'll repeat information and cause confusion and or overall create a negative experience for that user. And your solution is making sure that alt text is used appropriately and meaningfully, and that decorative images have blank alt text or are marked as decorative somehow, and that the essential images that are important for users visiting your website have alt text representation, so that way individuals who have vision impairments can consume that content as well. Another common fail is color contrast. So the use of color contrast as the only visual means of conveying information is negative as well, because you can't see. If you're just saying only navigate to the context that is red, if you're blind, you can't tell if it's red. If you have color blindness, you may not be able to tell what color it is. Another issue is insufficient color contrast between text and images or text and background. So you can't see the text because of the color it is over top of the background behind it. And this is going to impact people from being able to read that content. And to solve that, you can just use a color contrast checking tool. If you look online, there's a ton of free tools out there for color contrast testing that will tell you if it meets standards for color contrast. So you can test it yourself very effectively to see if somebody's going to be able to consume that content if they're facing these barriers. So we're going to go through another scenario here. Jason is seeking to obtain information about a Think Green event in his community. As a local farmer, he is interested in donating resources for a community garden in exchange for having his farm's logo put in the garden as a sponsor. The Think Green event details are depicted on the site as an image. As a person who is colorblind, Jason is unable to differentiate between the background image and the text. So this causes an issue where here, we'll just do this and we'll come back for a moment. So here's an example of what we're talking about here. You can see here there's green on green text, yellow text on a lighter backgrounds, and although if you don't have any issues with color contrast, this may show up to you that many of these are incredibly difficult to impossible for folks to read that do have low vision or their color is impacted in their vision. So you do not want to display essential content as an image with no way to perceive it otherwise, and you want to ensure that the color contrast guidelines are followed so that way it's visible for everyone. And also just to point out, if that person is blind, they would also need the alt text of any written content that's displayed within an image. So another common fail we see is around video content. You want to make sure live and recorded video content is posted with captioning. You do not want to do it without captioning. That is the fail. Thank you again to our partner Caption First for captioning this event. You want to make sure you're not providing audio only content without any transcript, because then no one's going to be able to consume that content. You don't want it to be difficult to turn on and off captioning on your web player. You don't want there to be spelling errors that really impact the meaning of your captioning. You want to make sure you're quality checking that. And you want to make sure if you're choosing a media player to embed into your website, that you're choosing a player that is accessible, so that way somebody can independently navigate and control all of the features in that player. So this affects basically every type of disability. So if you're deaf, you're not going to be able to consume content if it's not captioned effectively. If you're blind and the media player is not accessible, you're not going to be able to effectively pause the content or skip ahead in it or activate any of the features in there. So solution is to identify all of your videos and review them for captioning, and engage with great captioning providers, or create a self-process for captioning your own videos. Provide captioners with good spelling of names, products in advance. Make sure all of that content is robust and great. And we always use YouTube's embedded video player because they do a great job with the accessibility on that player as one that we use all the time for our video content because it is accessible. So we're going to go through a video captioning typo scenario. So Mateo is looking to take his career to the next step as a project manager, and he has 8 years of experience in the not-for-profit sector. A director with a community partner organization recommended a popular job board, and the job board has a video statement about disability inclusion in which they refer to people who are deaf as depth in the captioning. So this is not the way you want to go. As you can see, this would really negatively impact the exact individuals they are trying to include by providing captioning when there are typos in things as simple as the word deaf. When deaf individuals are trying to get that content, it's going to really not make them want to engage with that organization. So you want to avoid using automated captioning features as the only meaning of captioning video content. One of the very popular tools out there is when you upload a YouTube video, Google will auto caption it using Google Voice. And that often creates errors in the captioning, but what you can do is you can actually manually edit those captions that are auto-generated to ensure they are correct. So you want to review those captions for content and for essential spelling errors. You want to treat the captioning as a professional document that represents you as an organization. So, that is something that people are going to be consuming, so you want to take that just as seriously as a flyer or other content you're going to be putting out there, because critical errors can impact people's interest in engaging with your organization. So I want to go over some troubleshooting tips. These are some questions you can ask your website developers to help ensure if your website is accessible. So especially if you're selecting a new developer to work on your website, you can ask them, are you familiar with WCAG 2.1? How often have you been asked to develop an accessible website? Do you currently use color contrast testing tools in your web design? When you build websites, do you organize content by using headers or by using tables? And how do you ensure websites you develop meet accessibility guidelines? These are some great questions that you can ask. And you can also use these for other types of developments, like if there's a mobile app that's being developed for your organization, you can ask those developers these same types of questions to make sure that those are meeting accessibility guidelines as well. So here are some 5 tips we give people on how you can test your website for yourself to see if it's accessible. I touched on before, you can use the tab key on your keyboard, start at the top of your web page, and see if you're able to navigate all the elements on the page in an orderly manner without using a mouse. So put your mouses to the side, resist the urge to touch it, and tab all the way through that content. Employ the use of a free color contrast tool to identify color contrast issues. There's a ton of free tools out there. If you just search color contrast tool on Google, there's a ton of them out there where you can type in the code for what your color is for the foreground and the background to test if it meets the accessibility standards, and it'll give you that information. You can watch videos to determine how the captioning is rendering in those videos and correct any errors that you see. You can review the alt text for images. Make sure that the text is essential. If there is going to be alt text provided, remove it for those that are not essential, and make sure it's helpful for ones that are. And review all the links on your website to see if they are descriptive, if it's clear. If I click on this link, where am I going to go? So some other tips. You want to develop a website accessibility statement. This is indicating that accessibility is important to your organization, which is why you're participating in today's event. So including that on your website can be very helpful. Provide a link when you're doing that on how to request support for accessing information on your website. So if somebody does have an accessibility concern, that they are able to address that. You want that link so that they can report those issues or ask questions. This is the accessible website auditing lifecycle. It starts with training employees, conducting your testing, remediating errors, and then it continues through that process over and over again. So to prevent digital accessibility errors in your website, it is important to regularly monitor and audit pages to ensure compliance. We know websites are living documents, essentially. They're constantly growing and changing, so that's why it's important to build in the development life cycle the accessibility into those different aspects. So it's constantly being looked at, just like functionality, to make sure that everything is working effectively. So as changes are introduced in your site, that's the opportunity to check them to make sure that there are no accessibility errors introduced by those changes. All right. So I'm going to turn things at this point back over to you, Mary.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Gerald. We really appreciate the amazing content that you provided to us. And we've now entered the time where we're going to have the opportunity for Q&A. So we had a question as you were speaking, Gerald, about a good color contrast analyzer tool. I know that in the Bender's digital accessibility high test area, we use exclusively the color contrast analyzer tool. Do you have any other comments that you'd like to make about that, Gerald?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there are a lot of really great tools out there. Like you said, the one we use is the color contrast analyzer with color spelled as it is in the UK. That one is great because you can install it natively on your computer and use it for any type of content, but there's a lot of free ones that you don't even need to install anything onto your website, that you can just type in the hex code for your foreground color and background color. It'll show you what it will look like visually, and it'll tell you at what level of WCAG does it pass or fail. So it will. There's a lot of really good tools out there for that.
Well, thanks so much, Gerald. And for those of us who are Irish, we enjoy green. What is the hex code for green? Just kidding. Just kidding. So we have a couple of other questions. Thanks so much for those of you who are asking questions in the chat. Amy asked, how frequently should a website audit occur internally? What is the recommendation? Gerald, thoughts from your perspective?
Yeah, I would say if you don't know when the last one is, it's definitely time to do one. And then from that point on, you would want to retest your site anytime changes are introduced into your website from there on out. So, and really any change you make, you want to review all the content affected by that change to make sure it doesn't disrupt something in the existing flow of your website. So if you add something to a web page, test that whole website, or that whole web page, not just that item. Especially if you're having a lot of interactive stuff on your site and there's features around that are impacted.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gerald. And, much of this also depends on your governance practices and how frequently you're attentive to including digital accessibility in your design, in your development, and in your implementation. But clearly, those who have regulations that they need to attend to, such as those in the healthcare industry, who may have a requirement to satisfy Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services requirements because of health insurance, healthcare exchange matters, minimally once a year would be required, and that is if you do have governance and activities that are occurring throughout your development life cycle. The fine folks from the Epilepsy Association of Western and Central Pennsylvania asked us, where on our website would you recommend to put an accessibility statement? Gerald?
I think, a great place to put that is with, there's a couple different places you could go. You could include it with where people are requesting support, because that's where they're likely going to look for if they do run into an error. Probably down in the footer where you include some of the other content that you're, proud of with your website on the different things that you're adhering to. I would recommend that as well. What do you think, Mary?
Yeah, thanks so much. We often put privacy statements, for example, in the footer on a web page. So that would be a great place to put it. Accessibility is really, in essence, a component of trustworthy computing, just as, security and privacy are for us within our organizations. We're going to wrap up in a few moments. I wanted to try to get to Steve's question, opinion on those accessibility widgets on a website, a button that opens a toolbar. Steve, I'm making the assumption that you're talking about a toolbar, and we have one of those on the benderconsult.com site that allows a visitor to the site to use that toolbar to increase the font size. They can use that toolbar to read aloud the content on the page. They can use that toolbar, for example, we have the AudioEye toolbar on our site, and AudioEye has a font that allows you to change the font to a dyslexic font. So our brothers and sisters living with dyslexia have been transformed with being able to organically read content with that. So those are all really good. They don't make the website accessible, but they certainly create a welcoming environment. So, as we've concluded the Q&A component of our event today, I would like to pass it back to Christy Troutman for closing remarks.
What a great webinar this has been. I am really delighted to go through some of these very concrete tools, and I encourage everybody who's participated today to take action. I think the suggestions like tab through your own website, not using a mouse to see if the navigation makes sense, or using a free tool to check the color contrast, or watch some of your key agency videos with the captions on and make sure that the text that is representing your organization is accurate and complete in the way that you would hope it to be. So thank you so much for participating with us today. We hope you will check the website for where the recording of today will be posted in the next week or two, along with the takeaway with key points. And we hope that you'll join us for future webinars and spread the word about disability inclusion and access moving forward. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Christy. This is Mary. I wanted to thank Sherry for moderating, Gerald for being our primary presenter, RJ for delivering excellence in leadership. Most important, and caption first, of course, for all the captioning. Most importantly, I'd like to thank all of you for joining. And as a call to action, certainly feel free to join the next in the webinar series, Document Social Media and Disability Smart Events Accessibility. And our last webinar, if you hadn't had a chance to review it, Disability 101 is now live, the recorded video at disabilityinclusionpgh.org. I wish everyone an amazing day, and I'll look forward to seeing you 2 weeks from now. Take care.